Yeah, good morning, all. I hope I am audible to all of you.
I think yes.
Yeah, so I'm just presenting the screen. So I will start the session, and yeah, this and thanks Yogesh for providing me this opportunity to share and discuss about API testing, how it does and how it do. So we'll share and we'll discuss the things in this session. Yeah, let's start. So this is our agenda. Today's session, that is section one. So it will mention that what is API and how it develops. Then the second session, it will be totally focused on, and this is the main thing in today's session, that is API testing. And third section is API testing tool. So using Postman. So if time permits, we can have a demo on this, but we'll try to make it possible in today itself. And so we'll move again, move next. So this is section one, and these are the points I have to cover in this section. So these are the basics things I have just put here, because everyone not know the what is API and what is the basic things like SOAP and REST, what is the web services. I know that developers are already know these things, but some people who are new in this field and who want to be a tester, so they don't know how to work with these things, and they don't know the basics. So for that, I just put the basics over here, and I will go through the on this. So let's. So what is API? The first question comes into the mind. So an API is a channel which connects client to server or one microservice service to another service, and which gives us the output after the communication between the two APIs, and shows the results. And after showing the results, it which drives the business processes and provides the services which gives values to the user. And for some of examples, you know, developers will know that the APIs they are using, like flight schedule, railway timetable, Google Maps API, and advertising API, and the apps like you are using, like where is my train, you are using this application. And the Trivago, where we get all data from the all over hotels at the same place, at a single place. So that's the apps. So anyone inputs here can want to do some input, or move to next slide. Okay, I will move. So first about the API, that SOAP and REST. So many people aware that there are the two types of services, or the techniques or protocols those are used in APIs, that is SOAP and REST. So this is the best. This is the just basic information about what is SOAP and what is the difference between SOAP and REST. So SOAP is a protocol, where the REST is an architectural pattern while developing the API. So SOAP uses services interfaces to expose its functionality to client application, while REST uses a form service located to access the components on the hardware devices like mobile phones, the iPads, or any kind of devices. And SOAP only works with XML formats, whereas REST work with plain text, XML, HTML, and JSON architecture. So this is the basic difference. This is the example. This is the basics of SOAP and REST. Difference between SOAP and REST. Now we'll move to the next slide. That is API versus web services. So also people aware about like I'm using the API, but I don't know the difference between API versus web services. So this is the thing, the basic thing I have mentioned, that a web service always needs a network to operate the API, operate, while API don't need. So this is the main thing, main difference between the web service and API. For example, I will just give the example of web services and API. So while doing the automated testing, we people, the testers, we use the uh, the the third party API to put the Excel sheet data into our framework. So while developing the data driven framework, we have to pick the data from the fetch the data from Excel sheet and into our automation code. So for that purpose, we use Apache PY API, and that works offline. so that not need a network. So that is the difference. But in the case of web services, so it should connected to the network. The second difference is all web services are,
Yes, Vishal, yes.
yeah, yeah. And I have just mentioned the diagram here that what is the difference between API and web services. So all web services are APIs, but all APIs are not web services. You can see here this web services is in the between the APIs around, and web services are subset. It is showing that web services are subset of API. And it is already mentioned that web services use only the three styles of use like SOAP, REST, and XML, where API generally uses JSON, including these three text styles like SOAP, REST, and XML. Right. So we'll go to move next slide. Please, Yogesh, move to the next slide.
Yeah. Next slide is there.
Yeah. Yeah. Make PPT is full screen. Please, Yogesh.
Yeah, yeah.
So as I said that in my agenda, yeah, what is the role of API in development? So this is the main thing what developer does, and this is basic thing. So while developing the API, these are the three phases where the API, and in which in middle of this the API comes. Like the first layer where they develop the database, or maybe that it depends on the company wise. But general what is general things is happening like in development of any application. The first they develop the API layer, then second layer, the API comes in picture, where all business logics and all user requirements are covered, and where all APIs are developed or created according to the user requirements or business requirements, and that put into this phase. And in this phase, the testers also test the functionality where the APIs are working properly or not, and it makes them to assure that the application will go bug free, or there will be a less time to test the UI features and functionality. So it will reduce the project cost as also, and reduce the time also. So that is the role of development in API. So can you please move next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the question is how get it performed by the developers? Those are the REST requests. So we are talking about the REST API here only. So how they perform? The developers create the API with this CRUD operations. CRUD operations like means create, read, update, and delete. So these operations are performed with the HTTP methods like post, get, put, post, and delete. So to create a resource, they use post method. To read a resource, to check unit testing like things. So they check the method with get method with to read the resources. Then to update the resource, they use put or post method. Then to delete this resource, they use the delete method. And this is called the restful style. This is done with the restful style. So this is how it develops. So now I will just move to the next slide, that is how it communicates, how the one API is communicates to the another API. Like suppose a QA or a user request service or request anything. So it in that case the request the tester or user is a service requester, and where he asks the request, that is, and like the server sends back to the response back to the response back to the user. So that is called service provider or microservice, another microservice. So microservice to another microservice, or service requester to service provider. So this is the communication happens, and this communication is happens with in the form of XML or JSON format. And for example, I will just give the microservice communication example, so it will be easier to understand you that, like when you are when you go to to the Flipkart side or Amazon side, you find a mobile like you OnePlus mobile, OnePlus, suppose OnePlus model mobile, and you found that, and then you want to compare this device to another device. So in that case, you search the another device and put into the compare section. So when you start clicking on the compare button, so it compares the API, the microservices for the one device and the one microservices for the another device are communicating each other, and they are I mean out responding the results in the form of UI. So, and the background is in background they are communicating with JSON and or XML format, and they are providing us the results. So that is how the communication happens between the APIs. So please move to next slide. So now this we are moving to the section 2, that is the most important thing. So I hope everyone is clear with the first section, that is how the API develops. Maybe developers know more than that, but that is what is the basic. So can anyone tell me the this section 2? So the agenda is like what is API testing, why API testing, benefits of API testing, how to test API, step methodology to test API, types of bugs we detect in API, and how it helps to app development, and then the challenges we are facing while testing the APIs. So what is API testing? And before that, I will just add. Actually, this is not limited to the testers. Even developers can follow this structure, these techniques or this process, if they get more time to rather than after the development, or they are interested. They can follow these steps and they can avoid many of errors before the release or before the testers does the testing. So they can use this. And what is API testing? In this case, API testing to validate a application programming interface, like testing the API, all of, to check the functionality, reliability, performance, and security. So in this API testing, what they test, like the basic functionality of API. So that will cover the functional and business requirements in this second layer itself. Then the reliability of the application, like yeah, you can show this this triangle or the pyramid. So that that fulfill the requirements, the business requirements in this phase itself. The reliability, if how the APIs are reliable, like they are showing the correct results or not according to the user inputs or user request. So that can be traced here. Then performance, so how it we can check the performance of the API, like how it is taking time to produce the response of one request, like latency, the response time. The suppose we have created a collection of the APIs, like 100 APIs we are testing at the same time. Generally it doesn't happen, but still I'm just giving the example. If there is a huge project and there are bulk number of APIs and we have to test that, so we can check the performance of the each and every API with the tools. And and we can just put it on the tool, and it will show the latency, the response time for each API. And if it is crashed, then it is also showing the error report, or the the error code, HTTP code, that it is not found, or internal server error or something. It will show the HTTP code or the status code. And this, then the last point is security. Security, like how it secure, like is it cover the authentication, the OAuth security, and all that things. So it checks in this API testing, so basic things. Now by using tool to send the API, get output and note down the system. So I already discussed these things in the second point. Like using tool, you can check these things, how API is working, like whether it is showing the correct results, the output, and then the response, the system response, how we can note down that, and we can create a log files of that, and we can send a report to the client or the developers, so that they can just uh, work on that. So API tests are concentrates on the business logic layer of the software architect rather than the UI or the functionalities. So in this case, I already discussed that in this section, API are already checked the business logic and the business user requirements, and it covers almost all user stories which are those are functional, so that there will be less efforts for testing or developing the further things. I mean, in case of the UI, the alignments and the show how the user experience is showing the application. So before that, is it all the things are covered already, so that only the headache of testing the UI and few things. So that is what does in API testing. I hope I'm quite fast or slow. Just let me know if I am faster. Then I will just make my speed slow. Is it fine for you? Yeah, and I hope you are getting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So then the question comes into the mind. Many people ask question that why test API when we are developing the things and we can do it ourselves, and we can produce the result. Why the test API? So I will just put the example in today's agile development. I think 80% or 90% companies are today using the agile methodology to their day-to-day project development. Maybe it's Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, Scale Agile, DevOps, or any kind of things. So they need a faster result and they need a faster development because market are quite trendy today. So in that case, we need a things like to be performed faster rather than the traditional development. So for that, we need a API. So the API comes into the picture where the development requires quick feedback, and each task performed during the development is faster, uh, and the communication between the tester and developers is also frequently done, and it will show the results outputs in faster way. And the second model is like to meet the expectation as functionality, reliability, and performance security. That is already covered. That like these things already covered in this application, the business layer phase. So it will reduce the cost and the time of the company and the resources, and that will be that will produce the best results. To overcome the challenges during UI test which can affect the project cost. So that is the same thing again, but it is quite different. Like it's quite related to UI. So when we test the UI, if we talk about the traditional waterfall model, then we already we develop the software application first, then we give it to the tester, and then he will find the bugs, and then he will give the results. So instead of that, we are using the API and we are testing it in the middle of the development, and that is showing the result um, at the same time. That can reduce the project cost or the time or the timelines. So that's about the third point. And to overcome the challenges of record manipulation with the, and this is the one of most important point I want to discuss. Like when we are working with the database or the record manipulation in database, so which can be easier to test earlier phase, like in API development, so that it will not affect in in later stages. The project will not affect in later stages, like of application development. So it will show the results in the API layer itself. Now we'll move to the next slide. So after why we are using the API test, now we are talking about the benefits of API testing. So API tests are fast. Like I mentioned about the JSON architecture. So JSON architecture is quite lightweight. So because of that, it makes the APIs testing is quite faster. So that produce the result faster than the other things. So or the traditional development style. So that's why we these are the benefits. I mean, that's why we use the API. API can handle the assigned load. So I already mentioned the example, like suppose we have created 100 kind of collection of 100 APIs, and we are testing the performance of the APIs. So that things can be handled with the API. That will not be happen in the traditional, like the developer is writing this code from scratch, so that can't be handled with this traditional development. So API can handle this, and this is third party, so developer has lot of relaxation in that case. Simplify the validation of business logics. So as I earlier said that it is already covering the business logic here in this development phase. So the validation is easy for testers as well as the developers to in only specific to the business the requirement or the user story what we are covering. So that will make it simplify. APIs are working across the devices, browsers and system. So API can work, we can work with any devices, any platforms, any system browsers, like the, the browser like Firefox, Internet Explorer, devices like iPad, and any kind of the mobile itself. We can working across. Early testing could save the uh, yeah, early testing could save the project cost, that already covered. More scalable in the sense like suppose we can customize our APIs while testing, so that we can change it anytime. Suppose the requirements are there and there are a lot of change requests are there, at that time, if the application is already developed, so it is difficult to change after later phases of the development, and it will cost the company, it will cost the team and the resources. So API make it is easy, and because those are scalable, so we can change the, the logic in the API itself, and that will and according to the change request, and that will uh, produce the more effective results. The give high ROI, that is the same thing like return on investment. So it is giving the high return on investment instead of the later stages. Security, so it are more secure than the traditional development. So by by the help of security testing techniques, we can test the security here, and it meets the compliance. We can test the compliance phases in this phase also, the API layer, API testing. Yeah, can you please move ahead? So these are the benefits of API testing. So now the main thing, what is important to the testers, even for the developers and the new learners and the students who knows or not know about the how the API test done. So I will just focus on the things which I mentioned here, like functional testing or automation testing. So where you are a manual testing. Why are the basic security tests? Okay, the basic security tests are like I will just tell about uh, when you create a API and you test the API, there should be must there should be a authentication. I mean the feature there. So the tester should test, or the developer should mention the authentication there, so that it will cover the security base, or OAuth authentication. So we can give that. We can give the tokens to test the API. So these are the basic things we can test in the time of security testing, in the form of security testing. And uh, you can move. So yeah, that's fine. Functional testing. No, no, please come to the previous slide. Yeah, how to test. So whether we are doing the manual testing or automated testing, we can do the API testing in the form of functional or automated way. So, but for that purpose, anything we perform like a manual testing or automation testing, we need a tool. So the currently people are using these tools: Postman, JMeter, Swagger. Generally, the developers using Fiddler or Swagger, they are most aware of this. But while in terms of testing, the testers or the people who are involved in the testing, so they use Postman for REST API testing tool, for REST API. And in time of performance testing, so they must use or they are using JMeter tool. So now I will move to the next API as a contract first check and spec. So that is the most important thing, that we can say the prerequisite before testing any API, whether you are a developer or a tester. Suppose some developers get the already made APIs and they have to just implement into the current solution or the current implementation. So they can also check these things early in early phase. Those are the prerequisites, or we can say the checklist. So they can test it here. So what are the endpoints are correctly, how the endpoints are correctly named or not. Resource and their types correctly reflect the object model. There is no missing functionality or duplicate functionality. Relationships between the resources and as reflected in the API correctly to make sure what API is supposed to do. So we can check these prerequisites uh, into this phases. Uh, Yogesh, can you please check the I mean the slide and the document which I shared you. The I think this is current, not current one.
Uh, okay, but you can continue with this.
Okay, okay, fine. So so endpoints like HTTP methods and HTTP status code are producing correctly or not. So so when as a tester or as a developer we get the APIs, so there must be a document should be provided. So where the document is provided with the information. So what purpose? So what is the purpose of this API? What it should do? How it will be tested? To what purpose and what are the users of this API? What is the things? Those are mentioned. Those should be mentioned in the contract or the document of the API, and that are the prerequisite for the testers or developer, and they can then check the specification like endpoints, the resources, and missing functionality or duplicate functionality it is showcasing after that first trial of test, and the APIs are reflecting it is correctly or not, and the latency, the performance of the API. So that should be checked in the first specification, that is prerequisites. Now just move ahead. API test action, REST request. So as already mentioned, the API methods, sorry, the API test methods here, HTTP, those are the HTTP methods. So whether he's a developer or a tester, so he must test these things. So uniform resource locator, verify correct HTTP status code are showing, like I just mentioned the HTTP status code here below. You can read that. Verify response payload. So suppose we are testing API and it is responding the mention, like suppose for example it is the API is creating the users, and it is showing or it is created for a user, and it is showing the data of the user profile, like his age, his designation and all that thing. So it is responding the same payload or not, we have to check that. Verify response headers, a request body that provides further details for the request or not. Verify basic performance sanity, as I mentioned earlier, that how it takes the time to responding the request. Like suppose we are clicking on the get method, and it is taking much time rather than the expected time, then this is the basic performance sanity test. Yeah, we can move ahead. Yeah. So what are the steps, methodology to test API? So as a tester or as a developer or as a testing guy, so what are the test scenarios to create? So these are the simple things the simple testing techniques we can implement here, like basic positive test to create the test cases with the happy paths. So it should show the 201 after creation of the API. It is after if I click on the get method, then it should show the 200 HTTP status that the API is done correctly, it is working fine. Negative tests with valid input support us to create the test cases with negative scenarios with valid input. Like I'm putting the values like correctly, but I can get the wrong error message, and the API is running, it is showing on even the 200 status code, but the results are not the I mean the results are not uh, like the expected one. It is quite different, but the status code is passed, so that is negative scenarios. Negative testing is with invalid inputs, so creating the test cases with negative testing or invalid parameters, or we can say the destructive way of testing. So we can cover those test cases in these four parts, like basic happy paths, negative testing with valid inputs, negative testing with invalid inputs, and one test suite will be cover the security, authentication, and permission test, where we can check the basic checks like authentication, OAuth, and token, all that things. Then it will helps to uh, I mean module wise testing, and it will create the specific test result or reports. It will help us. So please move to next slide. Bugs that API detects. So generally after testing the APIs, we get this kind of bugs, and we can detect these bugs in the early phases, like API fails to handle the error conditions. As I mentioned that it is showing the correct result, but the error message is quite different. The second bugs are duplicate or missing functionality. Suppose we are getting the results, but it is duplicating the previous API's results, or like functioning like the same. So this can be check. This kind of bugs we can get. Not connecting to the and not getting the results from APIs. So suppose we are testing the API, we are clicked on the get request, but we are not connecting to the result to the server, and it is not getting the results. So those are the, I mean say the showstopper kind of bug. Security issues. Suppose we are using all security norms like authentication, but still it is not allowing me to the access the API. That can be, we can get the bug. That kind of bug we can get. The response data is not organized or unstructured way. Suppose it is not the API is running, but the data is not a structured way. Suppose the sequence is missing. So suppose we get the API documentation where the sequence is given like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, but at the result of the API we are getting 5 3 2 or 4 anything. So that is unstructured way. So that is also a bug. Misleading error messages to the requester. Suppose the error message is showing different and the API functioning in different way. So that is another bug we can say. So can you please move ahead? And what are the challenges we are facing to test the APIs? So first problem is like no GUI. As a tester, it is a challenge. The first challenge is if I am a new tester, then first challenge that comes into the mind, how I can test the API. Even I don't know the tool, because even there is a no GUI for the API. So how it can test? So it will be performed only with the help of the tools, or if he know the coding, he can do the he can test that API. But I don't know how to test with the coding. Generally people use, even the developers using Swagger or Fiddler or kind of tools. So we can test it with the help of tool, because no GUI. Validating the output in different systems. So as API, as a testing with API, we cannot validate it on different systems. So we have to first check it on any basic tool or anything, any uh, online website, so that we can just verify uh, the API. Like parameter selection and categorization is required to be known to the testers. So generally, this section is quite new to the testers. They don't know how the parameter selection, how to do, and how to categorize. Uh, Categorization is done uh, to test the API. So and that developer knows very well rather than the testers. Then parameter combination, parameter selection, and call sequencing. So even these things also challenging to the developer testers. So they just initially test what they get in the form of document to test the API. So they just perform as it is on the tool. Exception handling function. So it is easy difficult to test how the exception handles. And the main challenge is the coding knowledge is necessary for testers. So testers should know the at least basic uh, coding language if they're involving the API testing. Yeah, please. So you can I mean use of Postman. So section 3, you can test. We can create a test on Postman, but before that, we will just go through the Q&A section. So if you have any queries, you can talk. Can you move to the next Q&A section?